So then, Sandy, it was the European last weekend. Been lots of stuff on social media. I believe it's all available on Play, and I believe you've had a listen to it. What were your feelings on what you heard?
Well, I haven't listened to all of it yet. There's a hell of a lot of it. I have listened with a score to all 12 performances of the set test piece. First and foremost, I thought the piece was fantastic. Such a clever writer. I know when we spoke to Philip recently, he mentioned about it being steeped in traditional values and the way that he sees a brass band going. And he mentioned about the ranges not going terribly far above a top C. I think there's a few top Ds in it for odd people like euphonium players and stuff like that, which they're very used to in these days. Um, but it did strike me. It was slightly strange in as much as the way he scored it, and it did sound quite. There was a wide range of timbres. You know, it didn't suffer from a lack of top register. You know, it
No,
did sound quite lofty in places. But it was just, yeah, just such a well worked piece and full of things which did trip the bands up. Um, yeah,
that's good to hear. That's I'd heard
I
a few comments about it, and everybody I spoke to said they were really enjoying it.
yeah, yeah. I think that's about the case. It's a very lyrical piece. There's lots of technical stuff in it, which is certainly sufficient to separate the bands. And again, the things that struck me when I was listening to it, yeah, I have made a let's in real inverted commas a result, which means absolutely nothing all because my result is totally meaningless. The only three people that count. But it's quite interesting. I didn't take too much notice at the weekend of who played when, so I have listened to it and I have managed to negotiate the WOB play video without hearing where the bands were. Obviously, I knew who one or two of them were, but I've not watched the screen. I've just waited till the guy introducing it popped up on screen, and he would say, you know, please welcome to the stage band number 7 or whatever it was. I had real no idea who they were. I would immediately then go on to the score and ignore what I was watching. So I was doing it sort of blind, although I did know who one or two were, and it was quite an interesting exercise. It means nothing, to be perfectly honest, but I did come out with yeah, quite a different result than the one that was in the hall. But I think there may be one or two reasons for that. Um,
Sandy, can I ask you a
I
question, Sandy? Obviously, you were listening through the mics on
Yes,
stage. Now, I remember when Palanga was picked, there was a lot of fuss kicked up about the acoustic. And
hmm
reading some comments on Four Bars Rest, they're mentioning this acoustic again. I'm wondering if that played
yeah.
a part in the result.
I mean, who knows? I mean, we've not been in the hall. We have no real idea. You've got to take the word from the people who were there. One thing I did notice was that the hall it was quite, unfortunately, quite sparsely attended at times.
Oh, right,
Um,
I didn't realise that.
and the adjudicator's box was up on the balcony, the first tier, sort of up off the ground. Great, it looks a great hall, you know, a typical, you know, modern concert hall. Um, I have no idea what the acoustic problems were, and yes, you're listening to it through the Wobplay thing where the bands are mic'd up very well on stage, and you hear in all the detail and all the clarity. Whether some of that got lost in the to the adjudicators because of where the box was, I'm not sure. It's just that when I look at the real proper result, and I look at my sort of fake attempt at doing it, there are some significant differences. Um, and one of the main ones is the three bands. I'll give you my top four for the set test piece were in order from 1 to 4 were Ikanga, I had Brig Out second, Philibrook third, and Trezzy fourth. Now, in the real result, Willebroek and Trezzy were third and fourth, so that I've got them the same. The two anomalies I've got is Brighouse, I've got them second, and they were eighth, and Ikanger were fifth in the real result, and I've got them first.
Right.
Looking back at the notes I wrote, and again, this isn't real. I'm not claiming any sort of higher authority on it or anything. Those were the three bands, Ikanger, Brighouse, and Willebroek, were the three bands that, for me, in the second movement of the piece, there's a passage, typical Philip Spark passage, almost akin to Year of the Dragon, where you have a full band triple piano
Right on the floor.
moment. Yeah, yeah. It's about, I'm thinking off the top of my head, about 182, I think, in the score. There's a triple piano passage. Those three bands that absolutely made a fantastic job of that at the proper dynamic. They were the three most, and not only the dynamic, but the musical playing as well. Um,
Right.
I had Ikanger a clear couple of points in front. I had Brighouse a clear couple of points in front of Willebroek, and I had Willebroek and Trezzy sort of next to each other. But those three bands, I thought, made the best job of that bit. I'm not saying that it's the be all and end all of the adjudication, but I thought they made more of it than any of the other bands. And so, I mean, maybe that didn't travel to the box quite as well. The really soft dynamics. We've known that's happened in the past. I think I did mention a couple of podcasts ago about
We
English
had one
Heritage at
together on
London.
English Heritage, didn't we?
We did, yeah. And just to remind anybody who missed that one, yeah, we ended up seventh on that.
Yeah.
Um, and we had an adjudication that said, again, there's one of these really, really soft passages, and the adjudicator actually wrote, "This is so soft, I cannot hear it, and therefore I cannot adjudicate it." So maybe there was a bit of that going on. I don't know. I find it's quite puzzling that, well, especially the top two. I can't understand how the for me, they were clearly the best band, and
Right.
Briggers were clearly the second best band. Um, there's so much good quality stuff and so much music. I did find, and this is not to decry. I'm trying not to single out any particular band, but there is a different style of playing in in in
In
mainland
mainland
Europe.
Europe, is there?
I think there is. Listening intently to these bands, there's a slightly more emotion about the playing, uh, and or
Pro-
slightly less emotion, a more reserved approach in mainland Europe.
right.
Um, Maybe these are just the things that I've picked up from it. There was some very good playing all throughout, but as usual, I had there's a bunch of bands in the middle there that I've basically got within a point of each other. Um, and there was various. It's this the thing about, there are certain things go well in one and not so well in another, and then there's different things go well for the next band but not in another, and they're all in slightly different places. So you're weighing them up. As usual in these contests, you get the top two or three stick out, and the
Yeah.
bottom two or three for me stuck out as well. But it was an interesting exercise. It means absolutely bugger all, because it's the three people that were in the box for real are the ones that count, and I totally get that. But it was interesting. I wanted to hear the piece, um, and I just thought, yeah, there are certain performances there I think were a bit hard done by, especially Ikanger and Brighouse. I think
Right.
they just sounded far more at home in the music. There was a certain reserve in some of the other playing that, the playing was good enough. It was good. It was tidy. It was neat. There were some balance problems. There was odd clips and things, but there was just a lack of passion in some of it that I found a bit, not what I would normally expect. Although having
Right.
said that, a band like Ikanger is a very experienced band, I don't mean the ages of the players. I mean they've been at it a long time. They know what they're doing. They have built up a long history of knowing how to win these contests and how to play, and they have maybe a longer heritage than some of the other bands in the contest. Um, and then a band like Brighouse obviously play in a very English way. Um,
Yeah.
I think Brighouse were. I mean, we went to the Yorkshire area. I thought Brighouse were quite lucky to get second there. Um, I think there was quite a few things that didn't go particularly well for them that day, and I think they were quite lucky that day. I think last weekend, um, I would agree that they were quite unlucky.
Mm.
I thought it's, but again, you got to remember, and this is not having a go at Brighouse at all, but they have had a reputation in recent years of shooting themselves in the foot, self-inflicted wounds, sort of thing, splitting notes, not, certain people not being totally on form on the day, and to be honest, they all played great. I thought they were really good, so that can give a slight false impression where you just think, well, it's a lot better than usual.
Well, that's
But
good to hear because, like you, Sandy, I didn't have them second at the Yorkshire area, but I just think that maybe what you're listening to was completely different to what the judges have heard because of the acoustic.
it could be. I just think also the style of the music as well. Some of the bands that played Philip's piece just sounded, yeah, they could play the notes, but there wasn't a lot of music in it,
Mm,
And I thought those top three bands for me, or the top three in my fake adjudication, Ikanga, Brighouse, and Willebroek, I thought they got the most music out of it, not just in the slow movement, but elsewhere as well. Um,
yeah.
so it'd be interesting to know, but I think there's a certain difference in style. Um, and how that came across because of the supposed problems with the acoustic in the hall and the position in the box, I'm not sure. Um,
Well, there's
I
one thing for
just
certain, Sandy. The trophy resides in Switzerland.
absolutely. I mean, and I've had this discussion. I remember years ago coming out of St George's Hall in Bradford with John Clough, and we'd won the Yorkshire area. And oh, you didn't win that today. This old Yorkshire bloke, and Cloughie says, "Look in the British bands next week. You'll see who won it." You know, and that was the end of the story. We'd won the contest. We didn't give a
Yeah.
monkeys about
No.
what. And so yeah, fair dues to Trezzy
I,
Etoile.
I must admit, I did watch social media with interest. And obviously, a lot of people well connected to Brighouse, who I completely respect, was saying a few things that I didn't expect. Um, so they were putting the neck on the line and saying that maybe there's something not quite right with this result. But you've got to be careful with social media discussions because they've all got an allegiance to the band. I mean, obviously, I'm an ex-Brighouse player, and I'm still friends on Facebook with a lot of people, and you see
Yeah,
comments, and I was just hoping they weren't setting themselves up for a fail. Um,
it,
but it seems
it's
they might
it's
have had a point.
interesting. So this is the problem with social media, isn't it? That we all have friends in Brighouse, colleagues. You played there, I conducted there.
Yeah.
Um, we know the band pretty well. We've got lots of friends on Facebook and lots of ex-players who were there or supporters and all that. And I know there's a well-known thing about generally about social media and where people get their news and things, and they call it the echo chamber effect. So you end up listening, you end up being on social media sites or agreeing with people who already share your point of view,
Yeah.
um, and agreeing. You hear about it a lot in America with the Republicans and the Democrats, and they only listen to their own people, and you can get brainwashed. So you have to be slightly aware of that. I'm not saying this is what's happened here, but we were seeing lots of comments from people related to Brighouse who were very, very pleased with the way the band played,
Mm.
and uh, no doubt if uh, no doubt the other bands will have had lots of their supporters also saying how well they thought their own bands had played. We didn't see those because we don't have so many friends in some of these other bands. I'm sure, without a question, that a lot of them would have been on social media saying how well the bands had played and how they were looking forward to being high up in the prizes. So
Yeah.
you've got that sort of. You have to be careful with all that. That you're just not reading this echo chamber of agreement with everything you want for your own band. Also, you've got to remember this piece, and I can understand the players being disappointed, and especially after the. It's an adrenaline-filled piece again with Phillips. It's Enigma, variations and Enigma's the same. Tale is yet untold. They're spectacularly buoyant, sort of feel good pieces. And if you
Mm.
spend weeks and weeks rehearsing this and you're on stage at such an intense, high octane contest as the European, and you get to the end of that piece, you can understand why there's a release of adrenaline, a release of emotion, and why you become overtaken by it and wrapped up in it. We've all been there and done that on various
I,
occasions.
I've been so guilty of that over the years.
Yeah, I have, and I can remember years ago. I think it was after the British Open one year, sitting on the Sunday after it, the day after the contest, sitting on the stairs at home, crying my eyes out because we got second.
Mm.
Because it's such an emotionally draining performance that I thought was almost unbeatable, and it was beatable, obviously. And it's very easy to get drawn in, and it takes a wee bit of distance and a bit of time to see that. So I can understand why maybe some younger players got a little bit over emotional over the
Yeah,
result.
there's one
Um,
thing for certain. You lose more contests than you win in brass banding. That's always been
yeah,
certain.
yeah, you do. But I can understand. I mean, there's nothing to feel guilty about. These players are passionate about what they're trying to do, and they believe in what they're trying to do. They believe in their mates. They believe in their conductor, which is all great. It's fine. Um, you've got to take the performance away, and the result is secondary. It takes a bit of experience to learn that.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, I certainly think that maybe uh, for me there are issues with a different style of playing, and maybe some of this softer stuff. There was a lot of playing that I thought decent playing, but quite safe playing, not very risky playing. Strangely, the bands I thought took most risks were I Can't Get Brighouse and Willowbrook,
right.
and most of them came off. Some bands played pretty tidy, but pretty safe and maybe a bit dull for me. Um, and most bands could play it. There was one or two that struggled a bit in places, but mostly there was decent performances. But I think, yeah, the social media thing, um, yeah, you just got to watch it and take it with a pinch of salt. You know,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
it it happens again with you see it with people just basically, you saw it with some the composers involved going, you know, getting really um not het up, that's the wrong word. They were thanking the bands immensely for all their efforts and all that sort of thing. Um, that's yeah, it's just another aspect of it. You just have to be careful.
So moving on, this weekend is the Grand Shield. Um, there's quite a few difficult tests in them pieces. Now then, Sandy, I'm hearing on the grapevine that some players who played in the European last week are
Hmm.
playing with different bands in the Grand Shield or the Spring Festival this week. I don't know how they've done that because at the European, you've got to present your passport and your valid registration card.
Okay.
So I'm a bit bemused by all this, and all I can think of is it's this 2 month rule that has opened up brass banding into a swap shop.
Well, again, and this is no slight on the registry. I think they've done a decent job in trying to tighten things up. with borrowing. It was getting a bit out of hand. I don't agree with it, but there seems to be one loophole in particular that has been exploited by the less scrupulous. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, I don't buy it. There are there is that. I've heard about at least two players who played last weekend in the European are playing for bands this weekend in Blackpool. It's got to be legit, otherwise it wouldn't be happening. But I've got to question the I don't
The
know, not the
ethics.
morals, the ethics of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. There's another rumor going around that there is one band who is playing four players who have transferred across temporarily from not only a run of the mill top section band who's already at the Open, but from a highly respected top top band. And these players are all playing with one band who is competing at the weekend in Blackpool. Uh, so the only explanation really is that these four players have jumped ship from their own normal band to play with this band who is attempting to qualify for the British Open. And after the contest, they're going to jump ship back to their own normal band. I don't buy it. I'm sorry. That to
It's
me, that is
it's
just wrong.
just not right. This,
No,
and let's say that band managed to qualify with the help of those four players. What on earth do they think
yeah,
they're going to do when they're in the British Open, and they haven't got them four what would be quality players?
I would guess that they don't care. They're there. They've got there by hook or by crook. Definitely by crook. But the analogy I would use is the football playoffs.
Yeah,
So, I mean, my team in Scotland, Airdrie, are involved in them at the moment, slightly unexpectedly. Um, and I'm thinking, yeah, they're in the playoffs. If they suddenly borrowed a load of Celtic and Rangers players to get them up into the Premiership, or if the bands in the Football League playoffs at the moment are going to be Leeds, Southampton, West Brom, and Norwich. If Norwich City suddenly borrowed four Man City players to help them win the playoffs, and then those players go back to Man City, I mean, it just makes a farce of the whole thing.
you'd have a
I
very unhappy Grezzy because I'm a Leeds fan. But you're right. You're
yeah,
quite right.
yeah,
It's
but well,
just not correct.
I just don't think I don't know what benefit it gives to anybody except them that are bending, abusing the rules. Let's put it as strongly as that. Abusing
Yeah,
the rules. There's a loophole there which I think needs to be shut.
I
Uh,
completely
I don't.
agree.
I don't know what it does to the credibility of banding, but this is an argument that we can have at a later date and a longer discussion about borrowing players.
Yeah.
And a lot of the argument, I was all for it a couple of years ago, and especially when we came in after COVID, bands were struggling. We didn't know what was happening. Um, I'm maybe not so sure of my stance now because I think it's just covering things up. People are on about can we borrow percussionists? Can we share percussionists so that they can play with two or three bands and all that? And where does that stop? We talked about this before. What
Yeah.
happens if you're short of baritones? Do we have half a dozen baritone players hawking themselves around to 10 bands,
Yeah.
and playing for everybody going? It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't.
No.
I don't. You're putting your own team out, and maybe we're just in the situation now that. But banding, what you got to remember is banding in Britain, in England, in Scotland, in Wales. I know the numbers are down in Wales and things like that, but we have more banders than any other country in the world, right? We
Yeah.
said in the last podcast there are 10 bands in Norway in the top section. There are 9 in Switzerland. We've got about 80.
Yeah.
Right? Admittedly, they're not all the same standard as the 10 in Norway or the 10 but we still have a healthy enough banding scene. Uh, those bands compete at the regionals. Now, what you've got to guard against here, I think, is that if you end up borrowing players willy nilly, that it just it negates the sport aspect. And let's be brutally honest, it's a sport. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's nervy. It's like gymnastics. It's nerve wracking.
Yeah.
Playing on a stage, trying to do your best. If you've ended up having players playing with anybody they want, or bands borrowing players just to suit them to get them through, that, I don't know what benefit it is. Maybe we have to come to a time, and there used to be years ago far more British bands.
It's
It talks
short
about the,
termism for
there used
me,
to be.
Sandy.
To me, it just smacks of a lack of realism. That if
Yeah.
there is this lack of players, then we need to streamline. And if you haven't got enough players to compete, do we just keep bailing everybody out that can't compete? Because I know other bands that we're going to speak to someone quite soon who has a thriving organization because they work their backsides off to create players and make players. And um, you know, I'll not preempt what he's going to say, but one of the things he said, what about the lack of percussionists? Well, he says we just make them. We go into schools and we entice people to join, and we make our own.
Yeah.
So it can work, and you have a thriving organization, or you can just sit back and expect that the answer to all your prayers is just to borrow someone else's players, which to me, it doesn't work. You
No,
know,
it's not right. So, Sandy, obviously it's a busy time for banding at the minute, and we understand there's tons of pressures on, but really we need to look at ourselves as a movement and just realise that this is not the real correct way to do things. So
I just think that people trying to help bands by providing these rules that they can be helped out a certain degree. I
yeah,
think this is a loophole that's maybe been overlooked, or
possibly,
um, it's certainly being abused. I
yeah,
would go as strongly as that, and I just think it makes a farce of it all. I would like to hear from the bands who are doing it what the justification is. The people that
yeah,
are driving this, what is the justification for these bands in award-winning top bands playing at the Grand Shield, 4 players?
mm,
Uh, what's the justification for it?
yeah.
You
So
know,
we're going to have to wrap up for this week, Sandy. Sadly, I'd like to thank the listeners who been sending some fantastic comments in, both privately and on the Facebook page. And we will get round to discussing various things. We had a few things from a good friend of ours the other day, Lee Rigg, and it certainly raises a few questions. So we'll get round to that, Lee, and try and get back to you with some answers.
well,
Um,
I'll tell you what we should do with Lee. We need to get him on, and we need to do a podcast on how he works things at Wardle. You
absolutely.
know, it would be fascinating, and that's a success story that we need to be shouting from the rooftops as well. Um,
Yes.
you know, but there we go.
So that's it for this week, everybody. That's Smith and Grezzy signing out for another week. And please, if you've got any comments, leave them on the Facebook site or private message myself, Simon Greswell, and Sandy Smith.